Malthus never demonstrates better that he was the curate of a country church than when he explains how the superior power of increase of population is kept in check, that is, held down to the slower rate at which the food supply can grow. The people of farming villages who listened to his Sunday sermons were familiar with the natural world of plants and animals, so he started with that setting to illustrate his point.
Among plants and animals, the view of the subject is simple. They are all impelled by a powerful instinct to the increase of their species, and this instinct is interrupted by no reasoning or doubts about providing for their offspring. When, therefore, there is liberty, the power of increase is exerted, and the superabundant effects are repressed afterwards by want of room and nourishment.
This example from nature, which eventually inspired Charles Darwin with the power to drive his theory of natural selection and the origin of species, illustrates what Malthus calls the positive check to population. He does not use this word as something generally enjoyable or uplifting, as the opposite of negative. When he says positive, he means that we can be positive that the check will operate if nothing else has prevented runaway population increase. This check absolutely, positively will work if nothing else does. If we think about the balance between births and deaths that determines population size and growth, the positive check of Malthus works by increasing deaths. Positive checks remove people who already exist from a population. But unlike plants and other animals, Malthus adds a second, very different type of check in the case of the human race.
Impelled to the increase of his species by an equally powerful instinct, reason interrupts his career and asks him whether he may not bring being into the world for whom we cannot provide the means of subsistence. May he not see his offspring in rags and misery and clamouring for bread which he cannot give them? These considerations are calculated to prevent, and certainly do prevent, a very great number in all civilized nations from pursuing the dictates of nature.
Here we have the preventive check of Malthus. The preventive check decreases births and prevents the surplus population from being born in the first place, in contrast to the positive check that increases deaths of people already born. Malthus also mentions civilized nations when talking about preventive checks. He judged that the least advanced societies tended to rely mostly on positive checks. In fact, he judges the level of civilization in a society by the extent to which it has substituted preventive checks in place of positive ones. Even within particular societies, the preventive checks reinforce the superior position of the top layers of society, while poor people feel the sting of the positive checks more strongly. Or as one well-known saying has it, the rich get richer and the poor get babies.
The constant effort towards population, which is bound to act even in the most vicious societies, increases the number of people before the means of subsistence are increased. The poor, consequently, must live much worse, and many of them be reduced to severe distress. During this season of distress, the discouragement to marriages and the difficulty of raising a family are so great that the population is at a stand.
Along with his distinction between positive and preventive checks, however, Malthus the country parson also adds another perspective, a moral perspective. He suggests that all checks to the power of population can be considered as either misery or vice. The positive versus preventive distinction does not match up logically with the misery versus vice distinction. For Malthus, some of the positive checks that kill people off amount to misery, such as crop failures, famine, and epidemics of disease that follow in their wake. At one point, he refers to such miseries as natural evils. Other positive checks, such as war or crimes like theft and murder, which he calls moral evils, clearly belong in the vice category instead. The same overlap into both misery and vice holds true for the preventive checks. If a virtuous person thinks ahead and delays marriage and family in order to provide well for the children, the delay will frustrate what Malthus called the powerful instinct towards the increase of the species. Such frustration might be counted as a kind of misery. After all, as Botero put it, as apt are men for generation today as 2,000 or 4,000 years ago. The same goes for permanent celibacy, such as Catholic priests and nuns were supposed to practice. This also would amount to misery for Malthus. But as a good churchman, Malthus resolutely lumped most other preventive checks together into the vice category. Induced abortion or homosexuality, of course, were sins. Contraceptives were immoral because in Malthus's day, the primitive contraceptive technologies known at that time were used mostly by prostitutes to avoid pregnancy. Respectable women, once they did get married, would never do anything to slow or prevent the arrival of the resulting stream of children. To relieve the gloomy picture of life totally in the grip of misery and vice, later in his life, Malthus did moderate his description of these checks to population, though. In the later editions of his book, as it expanded into 2 large volumes, he shifted the delayed marriage preventive check from the misery category to what he called moral restraint. In other words, this is the preventive check that he advocated as the proper choice for people to use. Many people who have never read the essay of Malthus have the mistaken idea that he regards the power of population as a bad thing. While this power can have bad consequences, for Malthus, this potential for population growth is not a bad thing in itself. It is a gift from God, a part of creation. The bad things in this picture are the miseries and the vices. These are the things he would like to get rid of. Malthus was a traditional Christian scholar who accepted the basic doctrines of Christianity. The human race is living in a fallen world. We cannot escape the miseries and vices that are part of our fallen condition in this life. To see Malthus at his sermonizing best, jump forward to the 19th and last chapter of the essay. It is easy to imagine Parson Malthus in his pulpit on a Sunday morning over 200 years ago, a year or so after he took up his post as a rural curate. Chapter 19 actually makes very interesting reading from a philosophical, moral perspective. Malthus touches on all kinds of issues ranging from predestination to original sin, and in particular the two-sided coin of good and evil. On the last page of the essay, he presents us with his punchline to wrap up this sermon on population.
The necessity of constant exertion to avoid evil and to pursue good appears to me to be a very satisfactory reason for the existence of natural and moral evil, and, consequently, for that part of both, and it certainly is not a very small part, which arises from the principle of population. Evil exists in the world not to create despair, but activity. We are not patiently to submit to it, but to exert ourselves to avoid it.
We can almost hear Malthus adding other typical sayings from Sunday sermons, such as the words of Jesus that the poor you will always have with you, or the old saying that suffering cleanses the soul. His religious calling and life as a country parson shine out from every page of this first essay from 1798. Over the following decades, though, both his job and the specifics of his views on population changed in important ways, as we will see.